to Satsang. What a blessing and what a joy. To be together. Why do different prophets give different teachings? In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says really beautifully that whenever darkness is winning out over light, whenever adharma or unrighteousness is winning out over dharma, over righteousness, I incarnate in form here on earth to bring back light to the darkness, to bring back dharma, righteousness, to the adharma, the unrighteousness. Now, even if you look only at Indian history, even if we look nowhere else in the world just for a moment, and we look only at history here on this land, there's actually a beautiful set of statues sort of on this part of the ashram, opposite to where we have the morning fire ceremony, of Vishnu's avatars, the incarnations of Vishnu. Now, I won't go into all of that in too much detail here, but what we see is that in different places, again, still within the Indian context, still within the land of what we call Bharatvarsh, the land of India, so many different incarnations. We know how Krishna incarnated, the time that was needed. We know how Ram incarnated at the time that was needed. But if you go through all the avatars of Vishnu, they're all at different times, who arose while different situations were underway here on earth, or in India at that time, and what was needed. Then you expand beyond that, and you look at all of the other lands, the other cultures, the other civilizations, the other peoples. And you say, well, at different times in different places, different groups of people struggling and suffering with different aspects of darkness, of ignorance, are going to need a different type of being to come in and help them get back on the path of light. The teachings of the different prophets or incarnations or divine beings, or however we think of them, has to do with the world in which they were living, the culture they were living in, the problems being faced by that culture, the traditions of those people. So they're going to speak in the language of those people. You know, I've been very blessed to have a beautiful, network of friends and community all over the world, and so many different people, some like I am, robed monastics in different religious traditions, some householders in different traditions, but people working to bring light, to bring truth, to bring healing. And whether it's people working in prisons, whether it's people working with children in gangs, whether it's people working in a variety in refugee situations. Now, if you simply take one population and we say teenage ex-gang members in Los Angeles, and we say refugees from Syria in a refugee camp somewhere else in Europe, and we say women, violent offenders locked up in jail. Okay? 3 different populations of people. If you were in some sort of divine training program, you would be taught and trained in different ways to speak to help, to guide, even just these 3 different small populations of people. They've got different ways of thinking, they've got different culture, different languages, even if they speak English, nonetheless, even within the English language, different way of speaking, different challenges that they're struggling with, different darknesses that they're falling into. And then if you go cross-culturally and you say, okay, let's also add in youth soldiers, whether kids who are being taught in a madrasa in some part of the world, whether it's kids who have been, co-opted and roped into joining an army somewhere in Africa, wherever it may be. Kids with guns, brought in by a specific religious community or leader. Well, again, they're going to have a different language, a different culture. They're going to be struggling in different ways. And if your role, your job, your highest goal was simply to bring light where there was darkness, righteousness where there was a lack of righteousness, healing where there was injury, you'd go into all of those different populations speaking in a completely different way, using completely different metaphors, analogies, ways of explaining. Ultimately, the teaching is all love, peace, light, truth, oneness. But you're going to get in different ways. And so in the same way, if we look at the teachings of different prophets in different places across thousands of years, they're going to use different language, they're going to have different cultural references, there's going to be different problems being faced. And so it's going to seem like they're saying different things when really, if you distill it, they are not. They're all talking about the same thing, but just in different ways. I've been very, very blessed and privileged to be in situations with so many different high-level religious leaders of different religious traditions. In the United Nations, in Religions for Peace, in Parliament of Religions, in different places. And what you realize is everybody's pretty much saying the same thing. We say it in different ways. We quote from different holy books. But ultimately, at the core, we're not fighting over actual values, ethics, teachings. It's just different ways of saying the same thing. So, real prophets are all saying the same things. That doesn't mean that we don't have people in every religion, at every time, in every place, who have completely different agendas, which are about separation instead of union, which are about hatred instead of love, violence instead of peace. But we're not going to honor those people by calling them prophets. We're going to call those people very misguided leaders, the type you don't want to follow. Just because someone has a loud voice doesn't mean they're a prophet. Just because someone has a platform doesn't mean they are a prophet. So if you really look at the actual prophets, they're all saying the same thing. Just in different languages, just in different ways. The teachings are one. That's why we have that beautiful teaching in the Vedas that says, the truth is one, but the sages call it by different names. Even at that time, thousands and thousands of years ago, long before we knew what each other was saying, nonetheless, our rishis and sages knew that across the world, different sages were giving the same truth by different names. Any questions here that anyone here has? Yes. She's just coming from behind with a microphone.
Thank you, Sadhviji, for... I wonder, is there an inherent meaning in coincidence or synchronicities? I heard that, it's God winking at you, or I have the most random synchronicities, but I don't know what meaning to put on it. What do you think about that?
Coincidences, serendipities. So when you realize that we're not separate, that we're actually all interconnected and interwoven. On the one hand, you can say there's no coincidence, meaning, depends how you define a coincidence. If you say something has no meaning, no connection to anything else, well, there's nothing on this planet that has no meaning and no connection to everything else. Everything in some way is connected. Now, does that mean that everything has some very deep meaning that we need to analyze and stop our lives to, dive into what is the meaning? Why did we bump into each other on the street? Not everything has a very deep meaning. It may simply be that our karmic threads are woven together in such a way that you like pizza, I like pizza, we happen to live 2 blocks apart, therefore, we're going to bump into each other from time to time at the pizza place. Our lives are interlinked, And yet, I wouldn't want you to spend hours over-analyzing this coincidence of the fact that we kept bumping into each other over pizza. But then there are things where you just know from inside that it's a real serendipity. That there's a meaning behind what has just happened. One of the things I've seen happen over and over like that is thinking about someone and then suddenly having them call. That happens all the time. Think you haven't thought about somebody in 2 years, suddenly you think about them and then they call. Or you think about them and then you get an email. Or you think about them and then just that same day someone says, oh, you'll never guess who I just bumped into. And I love moments like that because they just remind me of how connected we are. You'll know inside which are ones that you're supposed to really take and go in with, and which are ones that just, just because you happen to keep bumping into each other at the pizza place doesn't necessarily mean you're destined to be married. Right? Someone may say, well, God, look, this is clearly destiny. We keep bumping into each other. Look, You don't want to read too much into everything. Sometimes it is just a joyful reminder of the fact that we are all dancing together in this beautiful creation. And just because we happen to whirl by each other doesn't necessarily mean that we're meant to link our karma together for the next 7 lifetimes. It might mean that, it just may not mean that. And so that's where you want to also tap into the other ways of knowing. Intuition, what does your intuition say? Does it feel deep and meaningful? Is there an energetic resonance? Or does it just feel like, oh, that was fun? You think about somebody and they call. Doesn't mean that you're meant to get on a plane and travel across the world to see them. It may not mean anything more than just, hey, remember, we're connected. It may be a momentary 2 threads overlapping as you weave a tapestry. And it may be the universe bringing you together because there's a very specific aspect of your karmic journeys that you're meant to go on together. But you'll know that through checking in deep in your intuition, not just because there was some external coincidence or serendipity. But yeah, there's meaning to everything. But it's just that sometimes the meaning is relegated to just that moment. And sometimes it's a longer, bigger meaning. And you'll know. Yeah, beautiful. Other questions? Yes.
Sadhviji, you said that we come together in a connection. Oh, sorry.
No problem.
Oh, yeah? Okay. Oh, got it. That we come together in a connection, like a very good connection we see around us when people are getting married or they are married. And if you compare those marriages to the people who are single, single people are more happier, I think. I'm not sure. I mean, you look around, I mean, they are happier. You look at the married people, they are like miserable with each other.
So, you know, it's funny because I remember using a similar argument when I decided to take sannyas. My dad is a divorce attorney, so I grew up literally hearing the stories. He was never allowed to use anybody's names because of confidentiality, but the stories of what husband A would do to wife A, or husband B and wife B. And we have statistics in places like America of, I think it's up to about 60%, at that time it was about 50%, of marriages that end in divorce. And I remember saying, so if I'm married, I've got about a 50% chance of getting divorced. At least half of the married people I know are miserable. From your question, it sounds like 100% of the married people you know are miserable. But I was being conservative and said, you know, about 50% of them seem miserable, which means that by being married, I've got a 75% chance of being either divorced or miserable. Whereas I too looked around. I looked at my guru, Pujya Sadhviji. I looked at other people living this life and said, well, this looks like 100% way to be happy. So, yes, I noticed very much the same thing. And on a personal level, I know very much that this is my dharma, to be a monastic, to not be married, to be celibate. But there are a lot of people for whom their dharma is in the married life. And I do know a lot of married people who are happy. So if you're married or you're looking to get married, don't feel like you are destined to misery. You are not. You just have a different set of challenges. When you're single, there's not a lot of compromise and sacrifice that you need to make on a personal level. In a community, we make it. Living in an ashram, you make sacrifices and adjustments all the time. Living with people in community. If you're living on your own, not in a community, you know, in a house or apartment somewhere, you have a lot fewer adjustments and compromises to make. But the ego is the ego. And the ego is going to bash itself against someone wherever you are. If you've got an ego that you haven't dealt with, even if you're single, unless you become a complete hermit because you have no interest in interacting with anybody, until and unless you've dealt with your ego, you're going to have conflict, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in an extended family, even if you're not married, whether it's in friend circle, whether it's in your community, even if you don't live with them. So the goal of life, I don't think, is to remove all of the triggers to our ego. It's not, well, I'd much rather keep my ego happy, therefore I'm not going to get married. I wouldn't recommend that as a reason to take a monastic life. It's about overcoming the ego. It's not, well, you know, my ego doesn't get along with anybody, therefore I'm going to stay single. In those cases, it's, I need to work with my ego. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the ego that's suffocating me on my spiritual path. So if I just keep letting the ego run the show by removing anyone and everyone with whom my ego has a problem, I'm not actually benefiting myself. So I always say relationship is a yoga. And if your dharma is to live a grihastha ashram life, a householder married life, take that as your yoga. It's not, oh, my ego doesn't like this compromise, therefore we should get divorced. My ego doesn't like this sacrifice, therefore I'm going to leave you. It's, oh, my ego is preventing me from walking this particular path, this particular yoga, closer to God, therefore I'm going to work with my ego. My dad, the divorce lawyer, also says he's next to my guru, he's the wisest man I know. And he always gives advice to people. And I remember going back many decades to when my friends were getting married, his friends' children were getting married. And he would always send beautiful letters along with gifts, you know, to people getting married. But in the letters, he would fill them with his advice. And his core advice was, when you are married, you've only got really one choice that matters. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be married? You can't be both. And he would always advise young couples, be very clear walking into this, that you have just been right for the last time in your life. If you want this marriage to work. And the story that he always told, it was told about George Bernard Shaw, but I'm not 100% sure it was about him. I've since heard it told about other wise people, was that having been married successfully, happily for 50, 60 years, somebody asked him, what's the secret of your marriage? What's the secret of your happy marriage for so long? And he said, well, when we got married, my wife and I made an agreement. And the agreement was that throughout our marriage, I would make all of the important decisions, the big decisions, and she would make all of the little decisions. And he said, I'm very happy to tell you that in 60 years of marriage, we've never had to make a big decision. So this is the wisdom of someone who's been not only happily married for many, many decades, but has spent his life guiding, working with people in the midst of divorce, as well as guiding those going into marriage. So it's not that you can't be happy in marriage. It's that if your allegiance is to your ego over your spouse, you'll never be happy. Not in marriage, not in work, not in friendship, not in any relationship. In order for relationship to work, Your allegiance has to be to the relationship, not to your ego. And the extent of the happiness that you are able to gain in relationship is directly connected to the extent to which you are able to not let your ego run the show. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
I came to India because I felt so lost for so long, and I wanted to find my life purpose. So I came to India thinking I would be in ashram, meditating, and it took me a total different path. And I discovered yoga, it empowered me, and then I came here yesterday, and I went like, oh my God, this is like, I want more of this. This is so good. So it's not so much a question as what can you say about, when we looking for a guru, we think we're looking for a guru, to follow a guru, and we realize that it's maybe not outside. It's maybe like some are devotees and it's great like that, and some others is like something else.
So the word guru literally means the remover of darkness and the bringer of light. That's what the word actually means. The one who removes the darkness and brings the light. Now the next question, of course, becomes what darkness? For a lot of us, especially from the West, it seems to be a Western illness. There's a sense within us that the core of who we are is dark, that there's somehow something dark about us. But that's not actually what this means, because in the Eastern traditions, in the Vedic tradition, it's who you are is divine. You are inseparable from God. There's nothing dark about you. All of the characteristics of God are the same characteristics of you. Light and grace and love and wholeness and fullness and perfection. That's who you are. There is nothing dark about you. I know for me on a personal level that was a huge one. Like I had just always carried the sense that there was something inherently wrong about me. Something dark about me. And to realize that wasn't true, that was just my ignorance, was huge. So the darkness that it refers to when we speak about the guru being the one who removes the darkness is darkness of ignorance. We're not evil, we're not bad, we're not impure, we're not wrong. But we are ignorant. We falsely identify ourselves with the body, with the role, with the story, with the drama. And we forget who we are. And in that darkness of ignorance, we suffer. We suffer anger, grudges, pain, jealousy, resentment, guilt, shame, not enoughness. All of this is born out of the ignorance of forgetting who I am. The guru is the one who shows you the truth of who you are, the light of who you are. Now, do you need an actual external being to do that? In theory, no. There's no rule that says the guru has to be a human being in form in front of you to do that. I was speaking the other night actually about a beautiful sage in the scriptures who spoke about how nature was his guru, and he went through a couple dozen aspects of nature and what he learned from them and how he was enlightened by the way that the bird lived and the way the insect lived and the way this aspect of nature lived and the way that aspect of nature lived. So there's nothing that says it has to be. However, as someone who is unfathomably grateful, indescribably grateful to my guru and to the universe for giving me a guru, what I can tell you is that even though theoretically you don't need a guru who's in form, outside, separate from you, the dilemma becomes the games of the ego. That game of ignorance. It is so powerful. It is so insidious. It is so chameleon. The ego is so good at dressing up as whoever you think you're listening to. Right? I'm just going to listen to my inner voice. So the ego puts on his inner voice hat and then sends you astray. The guru is the one who really keeps showing you that light, who keeps clearing that ignorance. So, can the guru be inside? Absolutely. When God is inside, of course the guru can be inside. When the core of who you are is one with the source of all that is, of course you have everything inside you that you need. The question is, can you live accessing that? Can you live really clearly seeing it, living it, knowing it, without the ego seeping in, justifying how you're living by giving it fancy spiritual names? Like, I can't tell you how many people essentially engage in what we would call promiscuity, but call it Tantra. Now, Tantra is a powerful science, a powerful spiritual path. And it has nothing to do with promiscuous sex. But I cannot tell you how many people have come to me following that inner wisdom, the ego, the desire wearing the hat that says inner wisdom, and have decided that they're just going to keep living exactly how they've always been living, but now instead of calling it promiscuity, they're going to call it Tantra. I can't tell you how many people I have seen have very powerful, beautiful spiritual experiences of being one with the divine. But they haven't yet had the experience of knowing that everyone else is also divine. And that's okay. Not everybody's experience, you don't have realization necessarily overnight at once. But without the benefit of a guide, what ends up so frequently happening is that spiritual experience becomes the basis for even more self-absorption, even more arrogance, even more separation between the self and others. It becomes this, well, I'm self-realized, so what do you mean I have to take out the trash? Like, obviously you should take out the trash because I am self-realized. I'm meditating over here, so clearly you should be the one to do the dishes. And you just see a lot of ways that genuine, sincere spiritual yearning ends up kind of diverted, well-intentioned, well-meaning, but gets diverted because we don't have the benefit of someone who's able to constantly show us the light and to be there to say, hey, you might want to double check that decision because that might actually be ego wearing a hat of something else. That may not actually be your highest wisdom guiding you there. Just double check, because that sounds to me like fear, like desire. Wearing the hat of higher truth. You know, think about wherever you go in the world, especially places that you are for the first time, places where you don't necessarily want to make a wrong turn. You know, like I love to backpack, I love to hike, I love to be in nature. And there's plenty of places I know really well, and I'm super happy. I love hiking alone and just running off into the mountains. But if I were going to a new place that I wasn't really familiar with, I'd want to make sure that I was going with someone who knew the trails. Someone who knew the way. Someone who was able, if I ended up running up a mountain that I didn't know how to get down, or running along a creek and I didn't know how to get back, someone who knew the way. Someone who knew the difference between the sound of a moose, the sound of a bear, the sound of a raccoon. You know, you got to know, well, what is something I should be concerned about? What is something to avoid? What is something that's okay? And since most of us don't have the benefit of the memory of all of our past lives, that clear memory of every time we've done this before, all the mistakes we've made in the past, the right turns, the wrong turns. For most of us, even though we know intellectually this isn't our first time here, it certainly feels like it. It certainly feels like we're navigating most of life for the first time. And I know I've got a limited number of years. And I know that I really want to make the very best use and best choices of all of the minutes that I have and not get too far lost, get too far distracted, get too far off the track. And so having someone who can say, you're no longer on track. Come back. Come back. Or to whom I can say, hey, this looks like a good way to go. Where's this going to take me? And he may say, I don't know. Go and see. Even though you know he does know, but it's important for a lot of the paths for us to navigate them, to make mistakes, to learn on our own. But just knowing that there is someone there who sees everything, knows the paths, knows which way you're walking, knows how to get you back to safety, knows where you're supposed to go, has a flashlight with batteries that never die. Like, why wouldn't you want one of those on your path? That's been my experience, at least, is I can't imagine under what circumstance I wouldn't be beyond grateful to have that being there. Could I, at some point in some lifetime, intuit that? Maybe, sure, of course. He's only showing me what's in me. But God, it makes things so much easier. So much clearer, so much smoother to have that guide. So I'd say you're being very beautifully guided internally, which is wonderful. Keep doing that. Keep tuning in. But should at some point on your path the universe bring into your field someone who can show you some more light, I wouldn't walk into that situation with a preconceived idea that this isn't what I need. Use that internal guru for now. It seems to be guiding you very beautifully. But keep yourself open to if and when a whole other form of light may appear, to be open to it. Yeah. Great. Have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your evenings. 2 quick announcements. The first is we announced in Arati today that Arati is going to be starting 15 minutes later from tomorrow. We adjust the Ganga Arati time based on sunset, and as the sunset is getting later, we're going to be starting the Arati at 5:45 instead of at 5:30, which means it'll probably be closer to about 6:30, 6:35-ish by the time we come back up from the Arati, which means it'll probably be closer 6:45, 6:50-ish by the time we actually begin Satsang. So I do hope that you come and join us in the Arati before the Satsang, and then just come up with us afterwards. But if you're coming from elsewhere and you're not coming from the Arati, we'll probably be starting about 10-15 minutes later from tomorrow than we have been. And also I keep meaning to mention at the end of Satsang that we have beautiful, free, open to everyone yoga classes here at the ashram every morning, every afternoon. So whether you're staying here, whether you're not staying here, you're more than welcome to join us. They've got, in the reception as you walk out, there's flyers with schedules of when and where everything takes place. So feel free to come and join us for the beautiful yoga classes as well. There's also a beautiful sacred fire ceremony each morning at 8 in our ancient grove of trees, just next to the central satsang hall. It's next to the Ganesh temple, so if you ask anybody where the Ganesh temple is, it's there. So yeah, whether you're staying here or not staying here, you're warmly and deeply invited to join us in the full day of all of the other activities and offerings. And so much love to you all.